Two. Hello. Ladies and gents, if we could just take our seats again, please. Yeah. Oh, sorry, all right. Frank, could you just shut that door, please? Okay, I hope everyone is suitably refreshed. I thought dinner was absolutely fantastic. I'll struggle now keeping my eyes open for the next 2 hours. We've got our keynote speaker now, Andy Stanford-Clark. He's going to be talking about the quantum landscape. Andy, you're going to talk for about half an hour, and then we'll do 15 minutes of questions at the end of Andy's talk on this one. Okay, Andy, over to you. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Welcome back. I see this is adventurously called the Keynote. I think of it as the graveyard shift. So if you do nod off, try not to snore, okay? And don't keel over and hit the person next to you, because that's also very embarrassing. And I'll be able to see. So right. So what I thought I'd do was, and thank you to Nicola for teeing up the basics of the quantum computing, what it's useful for. I thought I'd kind of bring that all together into where quantum computing is, where it's going in the near future, how the idea of a commercially viable quantum computer is right on the horizon. I won't go as far as my colleague's name was, who spoke just before lunch about the quantum safe. When we'll have a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, that's a little bit further out yet. In other words, we'll have useful quantum computers quite a long way before we have one that can crack today's RSA codes, but not by much. And then I'll talk about some of the practical application areas for quantum. Again, Nicola did a great job of some very specific quantum use cases. I'll give some much broader general categories of them with some industry examples of where we're working with clients to identify application areas. One of the things we're doing at the moment, because we haven't found the killer application for quantum yet, we're casting the net very wide to hope that we can find some little niche use case which will go absolutely brilliant, either improvement in execution time, in other words, something like an hour's computation as opposed to 1 billion years of computation, or that we'll be getting better results. So again, Nicola talked about the Hamiltonian space, searching through those ziggy-zaggy lines through the high dimensionality spaces. That tends to give better, if you get a much more folded high dimensional space, quantum isn't already showing improvements over the corresponding classical algorithms. So, okay, here we go. Ooh, who's that shocking person? Right, okay, yeah, that's me. So I'll go back to this slide. So I am one of IBM's distinguished engineers, a master inventor with 46 patents now, and I also lead the IBM Quantum Ambassador team here in the UK. So I've got a team of people who go out and talk publicly about quantum computing and quantum safe encryption to anybody who cares to listen. So I lead that team. Oh, it says that on there as well. Okay. So you've seen this slide before. So IBM's role is dual. One is to bring useful quantum computers to the world and also to make it quantum safe. You might ask if we're causing this problem. It's almost like we create the quantum computers that then cause this problem. It's not just us doing it. And the scary thing is we don't know how far ahead China is with this quest for cracking RSA codes. The Chinese government's invested a lot more in quantum research than any of the Western governments have, or more money earlier. And you may have seen a headline, I think it was last summer, it says Chinese student cracks RSA. It was the clickbaity headline. Actually, if you clickbaited it through it, it was only 15-bit RSA, which is not secure at all, which is why we use 2048-bit encryption today. But the aha moment there is that in China, undergraduates are learning quantum algorithms for cracking encryption. Guess how many undergraduates in the UK are learning about quantum algorithms for cracking encryption? Hint, it's less than 1. 0. There are some postgraduate ones, but not an undergrad. So, this part is quite scary. So if you weren't scared by the previous presentation, you should be scared by the fact that this stuff is coming pretty quickly. But we're still going to build these quantum computers because they're far more useful for other things. So there are some big, hairy problems that quantum computers find really easy, that classical computers find really difficult. And it's that area of problems that we're looking for with our approach to quantum, because if you can solve it using a classical computer, why wouldn't you? So if it takes the same amount of time and you get the same answer, why would you use a quantum computer? Well, there is actually an answer to that. And that is that you'll learn how to use quantum computers so that when you get a bigger quantum computer in a few years' time, you'll be able to solve a much bigger version of that problem then, if you know what you're doing with a quantum computer. And again, as Nicola alluded to, programming quantum computers is totally different from programming classical computers. I know because I've been trying to learn how to program quantum computers for about 7 years now, but because my brain, my reptilian brain, is hardwired to programming classical computers for the last 40 odd years, I find it really difficult to unhook that, to think about the sort of sidelong look you have to take at a problem to solve it using quantum. So at some point, we're going to have this moment where it'd be a bit like our Gen AI moment. It's a bit like when there was one day, about 2 years ago, when we didn't have ChatGPT, then the next day we did. Suddenly, like, the world changed, and suddenly all this potential was visible to us. So those of us who are using quantum computers already will say, well, we've already had that moment, but that's like we had AI before we had ChatGPT. Brackets, other LLMs do exist. I'll just use ChatGPT as a generic term for large-scale generative AI. But in about 2029, we're going to have a sufficiently large, sufficiently accurate quantum computer harnessing those noisy qubits that we have today into some semblance of logical sensibility that will be able to solve some useful business problems using quantum computers. And we think this is going to be 2029. That's not very far away. This is really cool. So we've had this roadmap that we published back in 2016 when we first put our quantum computers accessible via the cloud. And we've been hitting our targets ever since. And that doesn't necessarily mean past history is not a prediction of future accuracy, but I think if IBM, with all the SEC regulations and everything, puts out a prediction of what we're going to do, then we're probably fairly confident we can hit those things. So, I mean, this stuff's coming pretty soon, and the path to doing that is that we've already shown that quantum computers are better at some things, some problems, than classical computers, but we haven't passed this point yet that we call quantum advantage. We've got this as 2026. It's already June. It might be early 27, but essentially where for some actual real problem, some genuine problem, a useful problem, quantum computers, it'd be better to do it on a quantum computer than it will be to do it on a classical computer. Now, Google claimed a few years ago that they hit quantum advantage. They did, but that was an extremely contrived benchmark in order to demonstrate quantum advantage. We're talking about something actually useful. And the area we think it's probably going to happen is in computational chemistry, where you're doing sort of molecular simulations. Because as Richard Feynman pointed out, because nature itself is quantum, if you want to simulate nature, you should use a quantum system to do it. So that's what we do. So there's this whole branch of quantum simulating molecules, trying to find the lowest energy state with the bond angles and the van der Waals forces and the electrostatic bits and bobs to find the minimum energy configuration of the resting position of a molecule. And we're already seeing quantum systems giving more accurate answers to that than the best classical simulations of them. Then we start to bring in error correction. First of all, would be error mitigation. So this is where you run your program and then try and subtract out the errors caused by the noise to make it a better answer. And you typically do that by running it a whole load of times and then kind of taking an average is a horrible simplification, but basically taking an average of it. Sometimes you run it at different speeds and then kind of it characterizes the noise better, but you basically characterize the noise that was present in the calculation, then you can subtract that out. And then we get to error correction. And this is where you take a whole bunch of noisy qubits, and one of the algorithms we use is called the gross code because it uses 144 of them, because it's a gross. But other algorithms in that class, family of algorithms exist. which means you take a bunch of qubits, low hundreds, and you get one mathematically beautiful logical qubit that you can then use to run mathematically accurate quantum programs. And some people are holding out for that day when that comes and say, oh, we're not going to look at quantum until we have logical qubits. We're saying, well, actually, you can get some really useful results from noisy qubits. So why not take advantage of that first and then move on to the mathematically pure logical qubits later? By the way, to run Shor's algorithm, which is the one that factorizes numbers that will crack RSA, you have to have a very large number of logical qubits. So multiply that by about 144. So you get some feel for the very large number of qubits you need to crack today's encryption. So which is why we're some way off having that kind of computer. So in terms of the growth of our quantum systems, and I'll show you how we do the scaling in a minute, but we talk about the number of gates you can run. Now, if you imagine, so a quantum program is called a circuit, and a quantum function is called a gate. So gates and circuits, like electronic gates and circuits, makes up a quantum program with functions. And you've got the number of qubits down this way, and you've got the number of gates you can execute, number of steps in your program, before the whole thing decoheres into random noise. It just becomes a very expensive random number generator. So that window is called your coherence window. You multiply that distance by that distance. Having very short gate times is really good because it means you can cram more of them in. So if you've got really slow gates, you can only get a few of them in. So if you're doing competitive analysis of quantum computers, ask them what their gate time is. Ours are really short, so you can cram in a whole load of them. And then you multiply it by the number of qubits. That times that gives you the total number of gates you can execute. And we're targeting 1 billion executable gates. So 2,000 error-corrected qubits by about 2033. Now, how do we do that? And that's by scalability. And so our building block is called the Heron chip. All of our quantum chips have birds' names. Don't ask me why, but the boss is called Jay, so I think there's a clue there. He denies that's the reason. It's not a completely egotistical thing on birds' names, but we have our theories. Anyway, so the Heron chip has 156 qubits. Now, the precursor to this had 1,000 qubits. Well, why didn't you use those? Because they were really rubbish, because we'd crammed them in so tight together that there's lots of crosstalk between them, and they were just really rubbish. They just didn't do what they were told. But in order to get that chip vaguely working, we learned so much about chip fabrication and how you lay them out on the chip that the Heron has almost no crosstalk, and it's really it's not noisy, but it's very unnoisy, very quiet, I should say. So these 156 qubits are really good, but it's only 156. How are we going to get those massive scalabilities? And that is by joining them together. So we've got this magical bit of wire, which is about 80 centimeters long, that enables you to connect two Heron chips together and maintain entanglement. Remember, Nicola talked about entanglement across the two chips. So you can basically entangle a whole bunch of qubits on this side through this wire with a whole bunch of qubits on this side. And you can do that several times. So in our quantum system 2, which is the current model, imaginative named successor of the quantum system 1, it's the quantum system 1 there's one downstairs in reception, there's one in the demo room over there. It actually has 3 quantum chips in it, and they're joined together by these 80 centimeter couplers. Now, it'd be really nice if we could not only have 80 centimeters, but if we could go up out of the cryostat and down into the next cryostat and have like several cryostats next to it. Then we could just scale them out arbitrarily, but we don't know how to do that yet. And if you've got any good ideas, you'll see me afterwards. But one of the ideas that we have, and we're actually partnering with Cisco on this, is that you go from the superconducting transmon qubits that we use, you go into photonics, so you use photonic entanglement, then you can send it out over fiber optic, up and down, 6 meters would be sufficient, thank you very much, and then go back into the superconducting transmon qubits on the other side, and then you can carry on. So that's how we're thinking we'll be able to build these systems much wider separated. They've even thought of maybe we'll have a quantum internet one day where these fiber optic cables will be really, really long, but for now we'll be happy with 6 meters because then we can really scale these things out. And that's what we're aiming to do for the Blue Jay in 2033. In support of the pursuit of computational chemistry, the one that we're seeing is going to be the most likely one to give us quantum advantage, we've created a new chip called the Nighthawk just for this. Now this has only got 120 qubits, but they're really, really heavily connected. So you can entangle massive chains of them together all over the place. And that's exactly what you need to do if you're simulating a molecule, because everything's connected to everything in a molecule, so everything's interrelated. So this chip basically was developed and designed and has now been put into our quantum computers specifically to support computational chemistry examples in pursuit of this quantum advantage thing. So this is why we think computational chemistry is going to be the first one out of the gate in terms of quantum advantage. And that's already available on our Miami machine. These are not in Miami. These it's just the names we give them. They're all given a city name. There's no logic to that, like there's no logic to the birds' names. These are all sitting in our quantum data center in upstate New York in Poughkeepsie, which is, well, it used to be where we built our mainframes, but we build them somewhere else now. And so we've got this massive hangar, which is now our quantum data center. There's about 16 about 16 quantum computers online that you can access via the cloud sitting in that data center. There's also one in Einigen in Germany for our European data center. And then there are other quantum computers that some people have actually bought to have in their own data center in a few places as well. So where does this all go? Well, we talk about quantum-centric supercomputing. Now, when you have what's referred to as a quantum algorithm, it's not actually a quantum algorithm. It's a hybrid classical quantum algorithm. So some part of your algorithm runs on the classical machine, some of it runs on the quantum machine. And what you typically do is you do the first part, you sort of you tee up the problem, then you package it up, send it over to a quantum machine. It does a few iterations, sends the answer back. You unpack the results, decide what to do next, and you go around. So you kind of go around in this figure of 8, converging towards an answer. The closer you can get the quantum computer to your classical computer, the better. And the bigger your quantum computer, the more classical compute you need to keep the quantum computer busy. So we're going to end up with, here's one we made earlier, but what it looks like is essentially a whole load of classical computers, HPC. Then we've got a whole lot of GPUs to handle the AI workload. And you've got a whole lot of QPUs, quantum processing units, to handle the quantum part of the workload. And that will all be together in one place, not in one box, but in one building. So a bit like the bureau compute that we used to dream about when we were children. We'd send your deck of punch cards over to the computer and it would run overnight and you get the decks back in the morning. I know you're all too young to remember those. So am I. But essentially, there'll be a big one of these in the sky somewhere, or several of them. We only need 5, like TJ Watson did. But and the clever bit of this will be that you'll submit your problem here, and you won't have to say, oh, this bit runs over here. There'll be some really, really clever compilers and interpreters and translators here, which will break your problem up and go, okay, that's an AI bit, we've done that on the GPUs. Oh, that's a classical bit, we'll run that over here. So it'll automatically work out which bits of the problem need to run where, solve your problem, then send the answer back. Again, we don't know how to do that yet, but we are working on that as an active research area because it'd be really nice not to have the users understand all that stuff, the workload placement. Let us worry about that, or let the AI worry about that. In fact, the AI that fronts all this, and then let it work out the best way of solving it. And there's be some optimizations in there as well, saying you can actually run ahead of time, saying, would it be best to run this over here? Let's do an optimization and see. No, okay, so you actually have a digital twin of this computer running at the side to try out various what-if scenarios to see where's the best way of running this program. And when you find the most optimal one, that's what we'll do to run the program. Right, so that's what we're going to get, what we're going to do with it. 3 main areas for quantum algorithms that we're exploring, which are showing great promise. Simulating nature I've kind of alluded to, this idea that you do molecular simulation, simulating reality, and people are doing things like new battery chemistry for EV batteries, new types of paint that's ultraviolet resistant, new stealth surfaces for fighter aircraft. We're not doing drug discovery yet for pharmaceuticals. I mean, they have massive molecules, millions of atoms. I did see a paper last week or 2 weeks ago. They've gone past the 12,000 atom simulation mark in a paper that was published. So we are getting some quite big molecules, but not really up to pharmaceutical grade yet. The third area is search and optimization. Everyone's got an optimization problem of some kind to solve. This is particularly showing promise in the financial services sector, where you've got things like portfolio optimization, risk assessment, balancing between banks, all sorts of things. And there are quite a lot of papers published quite early on by a number of leading financial institutions as they experimented and started to build this science up. Interestingly, we're seeing less publications from some of those banks now, which leads me to suspect that some of them have actually found that they can get some useful financial results from the use of the quantum computer, and they've stopped talking about it because obviously that's competitive advantage. Can't be sure of that. They might have just got bored and wandered off somewhere else, but I suspect that's what's going on. And the third category is kind of the catch-all for everything else. That's sort of searching structured data, and that includes quantum machine learning that Nicola was talking about, where essentially you're building classifiers, so neural networks, which seem to train better using quantum systems, particularly for high-dimensional, highly folded problem spaces. Yep, that's what I just said. Yeah, that. And that, yes, indeed. And what we typically find is that any given industry will have several problems. They won't just be saying, oh, you're a chemical company, you'll be doing chemical research. So in the same as we use our computers today for Word and Excel and Facebook and playing games, same computer, different programs, people will be using their quantum program to solve quantum computer to solve different problems in different parts of their organization. So it's very tempting to pigeonhole people as, oh, this is an automotive application because it's BMW or whoever. They will be doing various things. There might be logistics, there might be computational chemistry, there might be some process optimization, there might be a whole bunch of things I haven't even thought of. And here you can basically pick an application area, pick up an industry, and these aren't things we've made up. These are things we're actually working on with clients in each of these industry sectors. Ignore the box around that. I just happened to be presenting to an energy company when I presented this slide last, so I put a box around it. But essentially, remember I said about casting the net really wide? Because we haven't found the killer application yet, we're basically saying, let's look at all the big problems in your organization and work out which ones may be amenable to improvement using quantum. And along the way, we learned some very valuable lessons of which things are not useful for this. And that's just as valuable, because people go, oh, can we use quantum for this? I wouldn't. So either you can't, or you could, but you wouldn't bother, or yes, you could. So there's kind of three categories. Can you just hang on 1 second? I've only got one slide left, and you can say something. I'm sure Nicholas can say, that's what my research is all about. Yeah. Learning quantum is really important. So if you're in the slightest bit interested, you can go to quantum.ibm.com, get a free account, and play with our quantum computers. Play with Qiskit, which is the programming language. Just try it out. Try the quantum coin flip, which is the quantum equivalent of hello world. So you take one qubit, put it into superposition state, move the dot round to the equator, so it's halfway between 0 and 1. Look at it, and it's completely random whether it gives you a 0 and a 1. That is essentially quantum coin flip. I remember doing that 7 years ago. It was heads, and a little tingle went down my spine because I just run that program on a completely new computer hardware architecture that almost nobody in the world had done before. Wow, that's why I'm still doing quantum now, because it's so exciting. And of course, we need to train a whole generation of quantum software engineers with Qiskit on their CV. They are being hired out of college now when they do. 2 of my ex-students have just been hired by a bank up in Scotland to do quantum stuff. So, that's already a desirable skill. And we invest a huge amount of money working with universities to get them to start teaching quantum programming, because if they don't, we'll be creating these wonderful quantum computers and no one will know how to use them. So you need to kind of create the demand for our quantum computers. If you want some help with your quantum journey, IBM is here to help. So we have a program called Quantum Accelerator, which accelerates you on that journey, finds an initial use case, helps you build an example for it, and then also teaches you about quantum on the way. It basically gets you going with access to our quantum machines and so on. So what we're essentially doing is trying to create big quantum computers and find the interesting problems that will run on them, which in the intersection will give us quantum advantage. And when I talk to clients, I say, what problems are you not exploring now because they're too computationally hard today? So what are you choosing not to attempt? I was with one of the energy companies and they said, oh, we've got this amazing, we do this massive optimization. It runs for a whole week. We're going, oh, brilliant, get going on quantum with that one. And they said, we only run it once a year. So we've got 51 weeks in hand. So it wouldn't matter if it took 2 weeks. So if you can do it in an hour, that doesn't matter. It doesn't help us. So we're not going to look at that one. But everybody's got those really nasty problems that will give them some kind of commercial edge if only they got a better answer. And that's the kind of thing we're looking at for quantum. So join us on our quantum journey. Just love these pictures of things. We've got a 3D printed model of this called the Raspberry, right? So it's Raspberry spelled with a Q.org. 3D printing models to make a Q System 2, and it's got a Raspberry Pi inside it that runs Qiskit, so you can actually run quantum programs on your little 3D printed model of a quantum computer. How cool is that? Thank you. Right. I know Nicola's bursting to say something.
Can capture it and share it with everybody afterwards. Is that okay?
Yeah. When I was doing the iceberg one, I hit something which I learned was called a barren plateau, and it was going round and round and round, and then I had to change it to a different kind of circuit. So how do you know ahead of how can you predict ahead if it's the right or the wrong scenario so that doesn't happen? Because they also learned there's different levels of entanglement. So how would you know which one?
It's a very good question. There's two ways. One is from experience. So, everything in life, you don't touch a hot stove because last time you did it, you got your finger burned. So from experience, and across the breadth of IBM research and services and all the people who are working in quantums, quite a lot of cumulative experience now being gained. The other way is you don't, so you try it. So you put together a quick experiment to try a little corner of it to see whether that's vaguely plausible, and then you build it out if it looks like it might be.
So it's not such a bad thing to make mistakes and just get it
absolutely
wrong.
No, in fact, you have to, because we're creating a new science here. So the only way to do that is by experimentation.
So why are more companies not sort of trying these? You get some time free, right? And you can try some of your data. So why do you think people aren't trying? You've had that going for quite a while now.
Since 2016, lots of them are.
Yeah.
Lots of them are.
Is it just that
I think we've hit a trillion execution, a trillion circuits have been run on our quantum systems cumulatively?
Yeah, so why aren't more businesses sort of having a go at this to see if...
Partly because it's almost like you're feeding me these are not planted questions, ladies and gentlemen. So partly because often people haven't got the resources to allocate. Everyone's busy doing their job to run the business, so they haven't necessarily got the resources to have a little quantum group investigating. Other times they say, well, we're quite happy with the level of accuracy or the time of execution we get from our classical systems. And by the way, not too long ago, they were using clipboards and paper or Excel spreadsheets to do this. So, it's almost like digitization comes at different paces to different industries and different companies. So they haven't yet realized the advantage they get from quantum. Places where it's really obvious to them, like in financial services sector, they were in right at the beginning, doing stuff like portfolio optimization, getting little tiny 0.001% yield improvements, which over $1 trillion is quite a lot of money. And they're the people who are looking to put this stuff into production. So it's a massive spectrum of progress and intent and capability and resources. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Christian Constantin, and I have two questions,
Okay.
if I may. The first question is, based on my research, which I found is fantastic, that 7 years ago, I started as well, checked on IBM Qiskit, and at that time, I believe it was between 5 and 10 qubits.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't actually know how many qubits there are, or IBM own. The question is, you guys are, sorry?
468 in our biggest one.
Oh, I mean, you are on top, I believe.
Yeah, we are world leaders in this, yes.
Yes. And my question is, I mean, everybody know about crypto these days, Bitcoin, internet, magical money, yeah? So I have a question, considering the fact that we can go as a Wayback Machine and actually de-encrypt based on the Bitcoin genesis and find the keys on those particular wallets. My question is like this. So what makes me believe that IBM or Google didn't try it yet, since it's just unregulated market and some wallet actually moved from one side to another?
Why haven't we tried cracking the keys?
Exactly, yes.
Money, basically. So we, at the moment, haven't got the money to build a cryptographically relevant quantum computer. I think, so one is the progress of the technology, so the ability to get enough, literally physically enough qubits that are not so noisy, they just don't do anything useful because it's just overwhelmed by noise. So that's a technology roadmap, which, as I say, starts to basically become clear in 2029. At that point, it's just a scaling issue, which means it's just a money issue. And our director of research said that he reckoned that if Arvind Krishna, our CEO, gives him enough money, he will be able to build a cryptographically relevant quantum computer by 2035, which can crack today's RSA codes, which means it can also crack Bitcoin encryption. Yeah.
The other question is based on my team and myself. We built a Quatum cryptographic chain based on EVM, Ethereum Virtual Machine. Obviously, it took us a lot of time just to actually translate it from C to Go EVM, go back. Anyway, it was fantastic, but the pain as well. My question is, does IBM has a type of tester team around, because we used Dilithium 5 and we used as well ML DSA 87 as precompiled functions into the EVM. So my question is, where we can apply for a fully test on the chain itself. We know we did some stress tests on our end. Yeah. We know it's extremely fast, but obviously these days everything is fast, so it's not a selling point for us. But the idea is all the energy consumptions, it's actually down 70%.
Wow,
based on lattice. So
okay, so if I can answer your question.
Yes,
so the question is there a certification suite for post-quantum cryptography? The answer is, well, there is a test suite. So if you go to ocs.org, Open Crypto OSC, there's a site where all the NIST standards reference implementations have been basically put into open source. There are some test suites with those which test basic functionality. But if you have a variant algorithm, which I respectfully call yours, then as far as I know, there is as yet no test suite to confirm that it is quantum safe. I'm working with another company that's doing something similar, and they had an independent cryptographer basically work through it and validate. So that, again, it doesn't prove that it's right, but this expert cryptographer has put his signature to say, I believe that it's right. And this is part of the problem with the current move to post-quantum cryptography. We've had those RSA, public key algorithms for 30, 40 years. We know that they're absolutely solid, apart from the fact that quantum computers have come along which can now crack them. But the implementations for classical decryption are solid as a rock. We don't know yet if these new algorithms and the reference implementations of them are as solid as a rock. We just believe they are at this point. So it might be in 5, 10, 15 years time, we might have to do this all again. How irritating would that be? So it'd be really nice if we could plug in crypto frameworks, which next time this happens, let's say, you just do a policy upgrade across your entire estate, and that instantly updates all the passwords and the keys and the across your whole thing. That's partly what HashiCorp does by centralizing that cryptography function in HashiCorp Vault, but there are other ways of doing it. But basically, don't think this is the only time you're going to be upgrading the cryptography in your organization, because I suspect it won't be. Some CISOs say, well, it's okay, I'll be retired by the time the second one comes around, but that's a really bad attitude. Right, time for one more.
Yeah, hi. So I have a question around what you were mentioning earlier about the Chinese government starting to fund much earlier quantum computing, but we've seen it was in around the last month that the US government actually started also funding. They gave a $2 billion grant, which IBM took $1 billion, which is really good news. Mm-hmm. Do you think this is the start of a trend there's going to be more and more and more funding, and it's going to be such as exponential to try and catch up to the Chinese government or other competition?
Okay, it's a really good question. So I don't think it's going to be exponential. So the way government funding of new technology areas typically works, and I don't see any reason why quantum won't be the same, is that they put money in initially to seed the research in universities, and that then encourages spin-outs to start, say, with venture capital funding, and there's usually some government grants to go with those. And then as people have the confidence to invest, knowing that there's kind of a stable landscape in a country for quantum research, let's say in the UK, that people say, oh, it'd be worth going to the UK to set up a company, and we know that there'll be support industries for it. And so the whole thing kind of bootstraps itself up and becomes an industry. At that point, the government can go tick, job done, and then put their funding down to zero. So you don't see any government funding for Internet of Things now, but back in 20 years ago, Internet of Things was you get government grants coming out their ears for IoT funding. But now it's established and just a thing. They've done that one, move on to the next thing. So I think the Chinese government put $5 billion into quantum research 6 years ago. The US government put $5 billion in 5 years ago. The UK government put $1 billion in 4 years ago, and then $2 billion last year. And the $2 billion that you just mentioned, of which IBM amazingly got $1 billion, and several other quantum organizations got the other $1 billion, was the latest injection of cash, particularly for quantum hardware. So the reason we got $1 billion was that we're going to build a chip fab in Albany, New York, called Anderon, which is going to build silicon wafers with quantum chips on them for ourselves, for our own quantum computers, but also to sell to other people as well. So anybody who wants a Heron chip will be able to get one from the Anderon factory. So we're basically providing a service for American chip quantum manufacturers to have access to qubit chips in the near future when it comes on stream. So that's a really exciting project, and that's going to really accelerate, because at the moment we only make them in very small quantities, whereas these are going to be on 300 mil wafers, size of an LP record, and there'll be hundreds of these quantum chips on each wafer. So it's a real jump forward. Very exciting. 1 minute. Okay, thank you. There's a question down here next to you, Nicola. He's on his phone.
But in the presentation, you said in the quantum data centers, they can automatically separate or distribute the task between the classical computation and quantum computation, but still we have to develop quantum programs specifically or not?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the algorithm will still have to have the classical component and the quantum component. But if you've got, say, 100 jobs of various different types of quantum program, each of which is classical and quantum hybrid, scheduling those in. So you're going to run those ones now and those ones next and those ones behind it, getting those all sequenced out. So the actual workload allocation will be determined by the algorithm itself. We won't say, I don't know, maybe we will. I don't want to say never say never in this game. But if you submit an optimization problem, you might say, well, that's one that would actually run best on a classical computer. We'll just run Cplex on the classical computer and there's your answer. Or it might go, that looks like one. It's got high dimensionality, very folded, might do better on a quantum system, if that's what the digital twin model suggests. In which case, it might say, oh, we'll pick from a library of quantum optimization algorithms. We'll use that one, decompose your problem in this way, and then run it. So I think there'll be a balance between what you have to know as the person submitting the job and what the system can do for you to optimally run it. But I think it'll be a sliding scale over coming years.
So what is advantage than the traditional, for example, connected classical computer system with a classical HPC system with a quantum system through network?
What's the advantage?
Yes,
Well,
of your new architecture of the Q data center.
Well, in the quantum-centric supercomputing world, all of that system will be behind the queue. At the moment, the queue is in front of the quantum system. So you run the classical part of it out. Actually, there's two ways of doing it. So up until last year or the year before, you have to run the classical part of it on your local machine and then submit the job to the queue to run the quantum bit. So the backwards and forwards was via the queue. But we've now got this thing called Qiskit runtime, which is essentially serverless compute right on the other side of the queue. So you submit your job to the queue, and it's a combination of classical computing, like your Python program, and the quantum part of it. And so once you've submitted your job, the whole thing runs on the other side of the queue. So the problem was that the latency between the classical and the quantum computer with the queue in between was way too high. So each round trip was taking far too long. It could take minutes or hours. Whereas if you put the whole thing on the other side of the queue, once you get to the front of that queue, it runs and the zigzagging between them is closely coupled. And that's what we're going to do for the quantum-centric supercomputer. It'll all be right there. The quantum computer will be strapped to the back of the HPC computer. It'll be very tightly coupled.
So it can decrease latency and the worldwide one. Wow. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, I think we're done. Thank you very much.
Thanks ever so much. We've just got the last session to go. That's going to be a panel discussion looking at supply chain procurement and safety with quantum and AI. We're going to have, where's Frank? Frank, Richard, Jacobo, do you want to come on up? He's going to start. Jacobo is going to start, and then we'll.
I would really like to start by congratulating you all because you made it to the end of the day. So please, big round of applause to all of you. I mean, it's never, you should never take it for granted, that you're gonna make it, from an early day session. So my name is Jacobo Quintanilla. I'm an advisor at the Association for Responsible Technologies. Over the last 20 plus years, I work in the humanitarian sector with different organizations, the International Committee of the Red Cross, different agencies in the United Nations system, and also with international NGOs. I'm truly passionate about making institutions work better for people, as opposed to people working for institutions. So this is an important dimension that runs through my career of community engagement, accountability, and that obviously extends to the digital world. I want to welcome to Richard. I think Richard will introduce himself in a minute. I want to start. The topic of our conversation today is procurement, sovereignty, and the supply chain. And I think when we hear about sovereignty, we immediately think about the states, right? But increasingly, sovereignty is an issue that affects all institutions, and very importantly, also affects to people. So I think discussions with Richard before the meeting, I think we also want to take the opportunity to bring the human bank into the conversation. I think fascinating conversations around quantum and different dimensions of technology, but I think at the end of the day, the most important thing is what technology does for people and how the technology impacts people. Every organization increasingly depends more and more on technologies and infrastructures that they cannot control, right? We're talking about software vendors, we're talking about AI systems, we're talking about identity services. And the humanitarian sector, what I've been working with the last 2 decades, is a very interesting case in point because the stakes are increasingly high. We request, solicit, manage, secure, and handle highly sensitive data for some of the most vulnerable people in the world. And when there is a security breach in one of our institutions, this is not a compliance problem. This is a true protection issue. What is at stake is the security, the well-being, the safety of conflict-affected people and people who are vulnerable to crisis. And I think that's what I want to, put forward today. And I think this is about, a woman in Eastern DRC who is looking for his kid, who is being separated when there was an attack in her village. This is about a woman who wants to give childbirth, in a village of Honduras, which is surrounded, by armed violence. Or this is about, an old lady who is unable to access her pension in the frontlines of Ukraine. So we handle their data. We have the responsibility to do no digital harm in the digital space. I want to briefly also frame a little bit the conversation today on where we are today on the use of technology in the humanitarian sector. And I think there are 3 structural challenges and changes, that need to take place. Number 1 is a fragmentation challenge. I think there are many organizations who are basically looking to give solution to the same problems, and we do that in an isolated manner. Think about beneficiary registration. Think about cash distribution. Think about identification programs. We all do that in our own projects and products in the digital space, but we don't have the opportunity. We haven't been able to have the opportunity to have a shared infrastructure that allows us to do that in a more interoperable way and lowering the cost. There is also a question of dependency, and that's something that has been discussed during the course of the day. Increasingly, our work depends on so-called hyperscalers and companies, who at this point in time, pose very important questions around our principles and about the challenge that they pose from a strategic perspective. And I think that's important that also the dependency as well raises an important issue around vendor lock-ins, which can be very expensive, of course, and from companies that have become geopolitical actors in their own right. So I think that's an element that I think it is a moment for further reckoning. And then first and foremost, it's a question of trust. As I mentioned, we manage some of the highly sensitive data from very vulnerable people, and we have the obligation to make sure that the data is treated, in confidence and security. I also have a couple of pointers to make, when it comes to the conversation around open source, and I think because it's been mentioned a few times today when it comes to the relationship of sovereignty and technology. For us, open source is a procurement, it's a governance, it's a sovereignty choice. It's not necessarily a technological problem, right? Humanitarian organizations love, open source because it really truly speaks to who we are. No, we want independence, we want scalability, we want accessibility, we want to collaborate. But at the same time, adoption remains relatively limited for three main problems. Number one is procurement frameworks are pretty much designed to for off-the-shelf products, from private companies because they are perceived as being less risky, more scalable, and something which is easier. So those funding models are not necessarily something that actually enable innovation and collaboration, with open source communities, which connects with the second point, which is an issue around capability gaps and focus. There is a lot of expertise and experience in IT in the humanitarian sector, but the focus is not in managing communities of interest in open source spaces. It's not about governance structures. It's not about documentation. So there is the talent, but not necessarily the focus that is allowed by funding to basically focus more on open source. And then another fundamental question that we see is the concerns and misconceptions around security and reliability. If we open our source, we will become more vulnerable. That's a main question that we get, asked very often. And who are all these volunteers that are working for you? Are they going to be here in 3 years? So there's another dimension of reality there. But I think what is changing today, and I think this is why we are incredibly thankful for the opportunity of discussing these issues here at IBM with Habber Tec, is the world is changing. There are shrinking budgets, there is less money going around, and there are real security concerns, as we have seen in countries in Europe and the European Union itself. So there is a growing interest in creating a shared digital infrastructure because dependencies, from certain companies or certain actors is seen as something which is not viable anymore. So I think that's the opportunity that we want to seize. From a humanitarian perspective, as mentioned earlier, we do believe, and we have seen that we invest heavily in products and applications, and digital services, but not enough in the shared infrastructure needed or the standards and the governance needed to really provide safe and trusted digital services to vulnerable people. And this is the question, that we asking ourselves. And if there are any investors in the room, this is the question that we would like to tease out. How do we build trusted digital ecosystems that reduce dependency, strengthen sovereignty, and protect people? And again, let's put people always at the center, because this is not just a question of ones and zeros. It's a question of what impact technology has in affected people. As I said, my name is Jacobo. I work for ART, the Association for Responsible Technologies. We are a Swiss startup. We just registered a few months ago. As I was telling earlier, Richard, this is our very first pitch, so please allow my a little bit stiff, on the rocks. Thank you so much. And I think we see very clear, the problem that humanitarians face today, which is the human technology has an infrastructure problem. First and foremost, conflict-affected people, as we all do, rely on digital services for absolutely everything, like we do from the first moment that we wake up in the morning. The question is that they are increasingly exposed as well to data misuse, to exclusion, and other problems that comes through the reliance on digital services. At the same time, as noted earlier, humanitarian organizations depend on a fragmented and costly infrastructure that is not sustainable anymore, and also, finally, longing and demanding greater independence and interoperability. So I think this is the important opportunity that we have now, particularly when there is less funding going around. The solution that we propose from our association is building a digital humanitarian commons. This is a sovereign, open source, trusted digital infrastructure that enables people to safely and for free access the information they need about what is available for them, where, and how. And this will help, and this is let's say, the value proposition from a costing perspective, will allow organizations as well to reduce duplication and cost and strengthen independence, which is incredibly important. I work for the International Committee of the Red Cross, for 10 years. Our access to conflict-affected people depends on the trust that parties to the conflict have on you. And that trust also dimension extends to the digital space. So if any party believes that your communication has been compromised, chances are that they will allow you to cross, the next checkpoint. So we need to make sure that we are also trusted in the digital space by conflict parties, and also that the people that we endeavor to protect and assist trust that we're going to do the right thing with the data. This is who we are. This year we have signed a partnership agreement with the International Committee of the Red Cross, and we are assuming full ownership of RedSafe. And RedSafe is already a product that's operating at scale. The colleagues, from the association I'm working with are the engineers, behind this product. It was launched in 2020, is operating in more than 18 countries, 7 languages. We have a million downloads, 150 plus K active users. There is incredible potential for scaling. And as mentioned earlier, our core services look about providing information asset, what people need to know about the services that are available for them. It provides alerts and also a service map, as people are in the move. And a very important digital feature is the digital vault, which allows people to safely store, the traveling documents, whether it's passport or IDs. Do not forget that those documents either get lost or get stolen. So I think having a copy can make a huge difference in people's lives. And to finalize, and thanks again for giving me the opportunity to open this panel. We propose, a 3-layer model for the humanitarian sector. Number one is the user layer, which is RedSafe. We want to make it open source and scale it, including mobile money. Cash is one of the best, assets that one of the best assistance that we can give to people affected by conflict and disaster. That's our flagship product. From RedSafe, we want to build the infrastructure layer. We want to build and operate this humanitarian digital commons that serves the whole humanitarian sector. We want to stop assist organizations to stop reinventing the wheel and invest in scale and adapt a data humanitarian commons that can serve also their needs and initiatives. And number 3, there is an ecosystem layer dimension, which is a little bit, let's say the consulting branch, which is how we support the sector to adopt the standards and increase cooperation. I think there is this very famous, motto in Silicon Valley about moving fast and breaking things. And I think in the humanitarian sector, we move incredibly fast. We have to innovate and adapt, and scale, on a daily basis. To cross, a checkpoint in Afghanistan or negotiate, access for your water tanks, in Yemen. The difference is that when we move fast, the things that we break are not just, physical items. These are human beings. So move fast, yes, but when it comes to digital space, build for trust, design for interoperability, and the most important message today for us is govern in the public interest. Thank you very much.
Check what the next slide is. Oh, okay. Well, thank you, Jacobo. Brilliant. And just sort of expanding out that sort of theme now, looking across supply chain, looking at what governance looks like and what security looks like as we sort of push forward in new boundaries with quantum, new boundaries with AI. I'm going to hand over to Richard, and I'll let you sort of open out and give your thoughts, Richard, on where we're going, what the potential pitfalls are, what are we missing, especially I think for me that's interesting from a startup perspective. If you're starting out in new business and we're getting access to large language models, OpenAI, Anthropic, and we're setting our business plans around current costs.
Yeah.
What happens when them tokens change? Does the business plan fail? What happens when governance changes? So our business and young businesses taking that into account. If they aren't, what should we be looking out for, and what's your thoughts on that?
Cool, big question, which I'm more than happy with.
Well,
I guess I should probably introduce myself as well. So, for those of you that don't know me in the room, I'm Richard. I joined HashiCorp 12 months and 12 days ago. So prior to that, I was with a company called VMware for nearly 10 years. I ran their advisory services and CTO programs there. And before that, I worked for a comms company back in the day, and I've been a consultant for 25 years, hence the grey in the beard. But the question is interesting because it's something I hear about all the time. So the primary function of the CTO roles at IBM, we spend our time specifically focused on, to the point, what's the human-centric challenge? And for the last 25 years, that's what I've spoken about. It's been like, how do you deal with what we call bad actors? So a bad actor is an individual within the organization or outside the organization with nefarious intent, which one of my favorite terms for this. And that's changed now. So it's not just about how you protect against the humans who have got that nefarious intent. We've now got this problem around agentic AI, and it's the biggest topic I talk about. And we're in the realm of things like post-quantum crypto, where one of the biggest challenges is how do you harvest now and decrypt later from a data perspective, as you prepare to be able to use commercially wide quantum instances or cloud-based quantum instances to get access to that data. And I do a lot of work with defense, a lot of work with healthcare. It's interesting because we were talking outside about, I used to do quite a bit around Médecins Sans Frontières back in the day. And one of their biggest challenges was very much around how do we keep data safe? And there was a hospital that I was working with in Denmark a couple of weeks ago. And unfortunately, they were subject to a harvest attack, and they lost just under 500,000 patient records. And what does that mean? Well, at the moment, nothing, because they can't access the data. But when that data becomes available, that's a challenge. And if you scale that kind of use case up to things like the work I do with NATO and with the MOD, now if I suddenly take a whole bunch of the actual secret service models and those kind of access points, and suddenly now I'm exposing the identity of humans where that should be protected, that's a problem. And you can then multiply that really, really cleverly, but really, really difficultly with agentic AI. So quantum and quantum post-crypto is really important around that model. At the moment, most organizations that I work with have got, for every one human, they've got about 50 agentic AIs in operation today. And the biggest challenge I see actually for new startups is they want to move fast to the point, but moving fast means that sometimes they get stuck into this, we can do it with AI. Let me be extremely clear, and I might contradict everything you've heard today now. There's no such thing as artificial intelligence. It doesn't exist. What we have today is AI tools. If you want to argue that artificial intelligence exists, we had it 28 years ago in Microsoft Excel, did the first formulate model for programmatics, right? What we have today is a bunch of AI tools. And ring fencing those and protecting those is where junior organizations, that's where they typically fail, because they're developing their DevSecOps practice around Gen AI. Gen AI is based around large language models. Typically, those are in the public domain. As we know, large language models contain bias. And I can give you a great example before I hand over. I like to talk about something called the purple burger paradox. So it's a perfect example of why artificial intelligence is not yet present. Interestingly, to get to artificial intelligence, we only need two things: ambivalence and empathy autonomously. And that comes from quantum computing, because when a 1 and a 0 can be the same thing, I can get an AI agent to make the wrong choice, in the same way that sometimes my mum says, oh, I'll have one more glass of port at Christmas. She knows she's going to have a headache tomorrow. She does it anyway, because that's the bad decision made right. So the purple burger paradox is interesting. So you can go to pretty much anything you want, Claude, ChatGPT, and say, show me a picture of the perfect burger. So I'll ask you that. How many layers of bread are in the perfect burger? 2. Totally agree. However, so when it generates that image, why do you think there's 3 layers of bread in that burger? Boom, great, Weber share Big Mac, well done, top 5 stars. So then you say, okay, and I don't know about you folks in the room, I really hate warm lettuce, right? I just think it's weird. So I'm looking at this perfect burger with 3 layers of bread, right? And this is the whole challenge around organizations trying to move too quickly. So I'm going to use AI now and say, okay, remove all lettuce from the picture of that burger. And one of 2 things happens. Either it puts all of the lettuce on the plate around the burger, or it just adds a ton more lettuce. And you're like, oh, okay, next prompt. What color is lettuce? And it'll come back and say, oh, green, most of the time. Sometimes red. I'm like, nope, go with the most common, green. All right, remove all green from the first picture of the perfect burger. And immediately what happens is any of the current Gen AIs will take the green out of the RGB spectrum, resulting in a purple burger. Now, it's hilarious, but the point is really, really salient. That's what you're asking. If I'm relying on my developing applications using these biased large language models, and I'm doing it in a way where generative AI is taking control of 90% of the DevOps process, I'm open to this challenge of Swiss cheese. And what we heard earlier, and what I just want to reiterate, is the only way that you can safely use generative and agentic AI in this evolving post-quantum world, securely and safely, without reducing speed, is you've got to put guardrails around it. And those guardrails, we call it dynamic secrets. Secrets management is what we do from Hashi. We call it Volt, and we use that as a product, which I don't really get into very much. But the concept is, how do I reduce the blast radius by automating and using security lifecycle management to automate that and take the human out of the process to build those guardrails. So when we're looking at new organizations, and even massive banks are doing this, banks are miles and miles ahead of their kind of quantum practices. What's interesting is that those guardrails become not as security used to be. When I used to teach this 25 years ago, I used to teach physical security. The CISO was the department of no, do not do that, danger. And what I'm now seeing when I speak at IDC security conference every year is, if you put autonomous security lifecycle management in place, those guardrails can help deliver less security risk in your DevSecOps practice, then actually the CISO becomes the department of yes, because you've automated and you've taken away the human error. And that's what a lot of startups are missing. It's what a lot of big organizations are missing, and it's what we solve at HashiCorp.
Fantastic, thank you, Frank.
Yeah.
Just picking up on that, and we spoke a lot about the governance piece, but also I think what's really interesting there is, how do we communicate that? You talked about, how do we, if there's any investors in the room, how do we communicate to investors? So for myself, when I've spoken to investors, one of the great challenges is the communication barrier and what they understand. What is Gen AI? What is the purple burger? What are the pitfalls? What do you see, Frank, as some of the challenges from a communication perspective in terms of bringing procurement and the supply chain into this kind of modern era, so we can move fast and we can enable capability, but the right capability in the right hands at the right time?
Yeah, it's a real problem. I mean, we're starting to solve the problem here, right, by discussing it. And until you can really table the problem and you can create a discussion around the problem, get awareness around that, it's hard to then get funding or any backing to actually develop a solution. So the first step is awareness and roundtables like this, forums, and actually, you know, going to Peter's message earlier and Jamie's message around PR and the messaging around this, I think is probably the first hurdle that we need to cross. Because it's really difficult to solve these problems, requires upfront CapEx, right? And it's money that isn't really there in the budget right now. People don't want to solve the guardrail problem. They just want to get the capability. And the issue is convincing your funding lines that actually this tail risk exists. And without dealing with it now, it's going to cost a lot more money in the future. And maybe it's not even possible to easily go back to start solving the problem. So I think, yeah, messaging is probably the first barrier that we need to overcome. Then comes funding, then comes capability development. I think that, having companies like HashiCorp, IBM, Red Hat, that have an open source ethos and set of products, and tabling these discussions in those places and gaining as much influence through those channels is a good starting point.
I think there was also a dimension, I think you mentioned, Richard, I think something that I find also incredibly complex as well, and it is not just looking at audiences, here on the so-called West as well. It's like we somehow have traded some of our digital rights and freedoms for convenience. And I think we're okay, largely speaking, right? Someone spoke about doing what's the information you put in this morning on an AI model, and that's all right, right? I think what I've seen in many countries around the world where I work is that that information, as Richard mentioned, in the hands of bad actors, we call them ill-intended actors.
Oh, I like that. I'm stealing that.
In the hands of those actors can really mean the difference between life and death, right? You can be singled out if you are for certain ethnicities, if you are for certain sexual orientation, if you are from, and I think these are some of the real problems that I think we need to also design, and I think the products that we so-called create here in places like London are the ones that are also going to be replicated in other places. Now, I think we need to start, and I've seen that, on my many years working as well across the pond, and discussing with companies in the Silicon Valley, is that you need to start, looking, from what impact the technology has in the very same people that are meant to be your customers. And I think what I find, and Richard, correct me if I'm wrong, is that sometimes we just look at those issues as technological problems without really looking and understanding what is the problem you're really trying to solve, and what are the drawbacks, of really launching into and hinge at times, development of technology. So I think bringing the human back into the conversation, it can only be good, from where we are. I don't have any sort of like a glass ball here, but I think we will be remembered, as to how we treat the worst off, in our societies. And I think that's the moment that we need to seize.
You make a really good point. There's an old adage I used to say. What's fascinating is, and if I go back like 15, 20 years, we were always talking about two things: multi-cloud, which was everyone had a cloud strategy, and it was a document that someone wrote. They put it on a SharePoint. They tick the box with the CIO, never to be opened again, right? And that was the cloud strategy model. But what we started to realize from a human-centric perspective is data has no value. So there are three types of data, really, four now with agentic, but we'll start with three. There's data at rest, there's data in transit, which is super critical, and there's data in use. And those three things need three different sets of guardrails. But data has no value until you apply context. And it's that context, which is the human centricity, which turns data into information. And information is incredibly valuable. And that requires the highest level of security, because typically that information is either about access or it's about a human. And we are fickle beasts. I think most of us in here, well, I don't have social media, but I do dabble in TikTok because I like dog videos. And my algorithm dictates that to me. So what I see is when I wake up in the morning, it's a really nice way just to kind of open your eyes without rushing straight to the email and looking at the 95,000 emails I've got, right? Those algorithms are based on information taken from the data of my access, yeah? So it's very difficult when you've been using TikTok for a while to get outside of that lane. The point I'm making here is that the TikTok algorithm is taking data, turning it into information about me, and using that to feed me stuff. And I get most of my restaurant recommendations now from TikTok also, right? Especially ones in London, because I don't know if you can tell from my accent, I'm not from here, I'm from North.
Me neither, by the way.
Point. So I think what I'm trying to get at is organizations take a lot of risk with data, and I see it daily. And the ability to manage the way that data access, control, management, storage is really critical to the concept of sovereignty. So when I speak to healthcare trusts and medical organizations, and when I speak to military organizations around the world like NATO, what we're starting to see is a move from dynamic security in a cloud-based methodology. And let's be clear, cloud is not a place. Cloud is a methodology to deliver IT services and solutions. So you can have cloud on-prem, for example, and we do that with Z mainframe at IBM, for example. But when you consider that, and you consider the value of it, it changes the way you ring fence it, and it changes the way you access it. So what's brilliant about dynamic secrets when it comes to that information is the number of times I've come across organizations that have developed a database, a DB analytics application, and the API integration, the connectivity between that app and the database is password protected, which is good practice, but the password is PA55WORD, and it's been that for like the last 25 years. Or password 123 was my favorite one, and that was a bank. So we're not looking at security in the appropriate way. I always say that, and this goes back to the concept about startup organizations and any organization. If we still look at security, especially in the post-quantum crypto world, as having a really big wall, a moat, more crocodiles than I had before, a bigger portcullis, then it seems to me that CISOs have never seen Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, where they just catapult over the wall onto a haystack, right? So what we need to do is change and think about security a little bit differently. And if you do that with a dynamic secrets model and a control plane, you can start to think of it more as hygiene. So cyber hygiene is about understanding behavior in your environments, not access. And that means we can now look at the behavior of the data. So if the data access point or the data in use suddenly skyrockets on the compute power on your services, that's odd behavior. And we can go from automation into human intervention much, much, much faster than you can if you're relying on access and walls and structure. So I always talk about the best CISOs I meet are always in the startups now, and always in I do a lot of work in Silicon Valley as well. And they are looking at the concept of data in use, data in transit, and data at rest, but making sure that's safe from a cyber hygiene perspective, i.e. behavioral access and control, than cybersecurity, which is, I want you to change your password every 6 weeks, which is what we do at IBM. And I don't know about anyone else in the room, so do feel free not to own up to this if you don't want to. I'll do it for you. I have one password, and every 6 weeks, I go along the top line of that keyboard and go from an exclamation mark on the end to an @ sign at the end to an octothorpe at the end, or a hash if you prefer. And I do that. And everyone does it. Like, you do it at home, you do it at work, because it's just a pain. Whereas if you go back to behavioral access, where secrets are ephemeral, i.e. temporary, then you can serve a secret access and destroy it immediately. And you can do that over and over and over and over again. And suddenly we've changed the way that we're protecting human-centric information. And that brings an enormous amount of safety nets, especially when it comes to the Swiss cheese applications you see being done in generative AI. So you've got, it's one of those brilliant things where we're at the precipice of vastly advanced technology. It's just knocking on the door. You can go around the corner and see it. But until we start thinking, to your point about, do we understand the adoption of that behaviors, then we're not getting to the point of hygiene, and we're not getting to the point of the Department of Yes. And that's really where that security lifecycle management becomes part of one of the amazing things that IBM bought HashiCorp for, was because we added that to their portfolio. And I think that's the real opportunity, is changing the behavior of thought so that we can then enable innovation. And that's one of the brilliant things about when I joined Hashi. I knew about the IBM acquisition, and I knew that we were going to go from our solutions portfolio to 8 million products on a product list. But suddenly those solutions can be significantly more interlocked. And I always talk about better together, and we were talking about this earlier. And I think that's what the open source thing is really important for, because then you've got that better together piece. You know what I mean?
I completely, and I also find that this conversation is very valuable. It's also very counterintuitive to what we were today, right?
Yeah,
because you're talking about guardrails. I mean, those are concepts that nobody wants to hear about, broadly speaking, right? Because that slows us down. I mean, it's been mentioned as well, some geopolitical actors, whether China, whether the US, and I think the problem is, how you really put, a human-centric, development, safety, and security, while at the same time wanting to really win, this technological arms race, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is a little bit of the conundrum we're today, right? So how we couple, humans security, but also technological advancement. And I think sometimes we have the political dimension, and then we have the technological and the human dimension. I think bringing those in a triangle is quite a conundrum, to put it mildly.
Good word. It is. There's a really interesting example of something called, pardon me, confused constables. I talked about bad actors, which can be a human or a thing, but the confused constable is quite an interesting thing. It does bring me to a point. Never do live demos. I've known that for about 25 years. Do not, it'll fail. Something's going to go wrong, right? Just never do a live demo. Get a video of it working, bosh. Everyone's happy. So it's down in Hursley. We have this amazing innovation center down in just outside of Winchester. It's pretty cool. They designed the Spitfire there, but also the first ever hard disk is in the museum in the basement, and I got to touch it, and all of my nerd points were won for the day. I was texting my gaming group. I was like, guys, I just took the first half. Super excited. The point is, I did a live demo of the confused constable. So we set up a sandbox, and we attached it to the HR systems at IBM. Okay, and we set up a bot. Something simple. You see it on websites all over the world, right? And I asked it, okay, let's see if we can confuse the constable, right? So the guardrails were already in place. And I said, how much money does Richard Bennett earn? And it's like, whoa, can't tell you that. And I was like, good, excellent, because that was on a big screen. And then I said, okay, what band is, what's Richard Bennett's seniority at IBM? It's like, oh, he's a VP, he's a CTO. And I was like, oh, what band is that? I was like, oh, he's a band 11. Oh, okay, cool. Roughly how much money does a band 11 earn at IBM? And it brought up an like a range. And I'm like, oh, that's not great, is it? Blank screen. I was like, so as you can see, the agent didn't know better, because it doesn't have that. There's no artificial intelligence. That's just what you're telling it to do. So as a result, we've got to be really careful about that leads to the whole point of not just supply chain, but audit chain. And when we look at governance and compliance and things like banks and organizations or insurance companies, the audit trail is super high profile. But to your point, when we're looking at citizen data, it's even more high profile. So if you've got a bad actor or a confused constable and you can't audit why there was a request, what that request kicked off, what data did it have access to, and then see that. Then when I come and knock on your door and say, show me your audit reports for your agentic AI environment, you can't do it. Whereas you've got things like Aptio and Turbonomic, which are, again, the better together pieces of the IBM portfolio, you get that full audit trail. And so now I can step up automation and say, oh, I see you've come to talk to me, your financial lifecycle merchant. Fantastic. Here is all the data that's been automatically managed. And this is where we've eliminated the concept of bad actors as far as you can. And we've definitely eliminated confused constables. And that again comes back down to this concept of the hygiene. So I think you're absolutely spot on what we're all saying here, which is it's not just about, and I think the best conversations I'm having right now are things like, what happens if it's a machine? So like we've got factories that I work with, 3 really big German automotive companies. There is only 3, so I think you can probably take a swing. And we are looking at what happens when they have machine learning in that environment. And then we look at some of the organizations that are doing really rapid drug development, like new startup organizations. And as a result, they're looking at what's happening when machines are talking to machines. And until you get the audit trail, how are you making sure that that dynamic sequence model is actually working? And then when we look at harvest now and decrypt later, what are we doing when the machine is actually setting up those workflows? And are we aware of those workflows? So infrastructure lifecycle management becomes a separate topic for a different day, but that's how you start integrating critical infrastructure. And to give you one last example, there's a company called Rijkswaterstaat in the Netherlands, and they're responsible for the critical infrastructure of all of the floodgates in the Netherlands. And if someone's to come in and they haven't got dynamic secrets management, it's a static environment at the moment, and hacks one of the floodgates and lowers it or lifts it, depending on where it is, then the Netherlands is underwater. Like this is a real serious security breach when critical infrastructure is part of the mix. And if you've got anybody here that works with petrochemicals or works with IoT in any way, what would happen if you turned off a ventilator in an operating theatre? Right. So these are the types of, the challenges are not just like they used to be VLANs and VPNs and access. The challenges are back to that behavioral thing. And then from a startup perspective, we always like to say, if you want to go really fast in a sports car, the way to do that is not a bigger engine or better aerodynamics, it's bigger brakes. How quickly can you stop it? And that
bigger brakes really or bigger brains.
Bigger brains.
Now that's great. Just cognizant of the time, because this one's due to finish at 3, right? I'll just sort of draw a line under that and just open it out for a quick 5 minutes of questions, if that's okay, Georgie. Any questions from the floor?
2.
What if actually the problem, nothing to be, assimilated with red hat? So what about the fact that black hats actors actually, for them it's so easy to breach that security level? So what if the problem it's actually open source?
Oh, it's a big topic. Okay, so I'll throw this around as well, but I think the initial answer to that is, do you understand where the risk is? So open source is not a problem. It is a really powerful opportunity, and actually a lot of the services that we run are designed around that. The bit that's interesting around the kind of how do I protect open source, it actually comes back to what I was saying. So I have a lot of work that we do with Red Hat. So we have an infrastructure lifecycle management, which a lot of people think competes with Red Hat and actually complements it. So if I've got a customer who's doing autonomous service provisioning using Ansible, for example, I can still use Vault and wrap it. So I can apply dynamic secrets to other platforms, including open source. And that's the way that we designed our portfolio, was you don't have to do everything with Hashi, but you can keep it dynamically secure with Vault. And I think when you look at certain security companies, I won't name them all, but one of the ways that we differ to things like CyberArk is like a static bubble that you put around things. And our approach is much more about federation. So federation is as a word, doesn't mean a lot, but the actual implementation of federation is, can I deliver applications, functions, and services across any platform, open source or other, in a way that I can do that where it interlocks with each other with no deprecation of features and functionality. And the only way to do that is with security lifecycle management and automation, because you simply can't do it fast enough with people. Does that answer your question?
Cool. If we just take one more question and then we'll just cognizant of time, that's all.
Hello, thank you. Thinking about AI safety and AI governance, I really support open source, like in a certain layer, for example, as you say, like services, access to everyone, etc. But when we get into a point where like we're in a frontier AI models, when the capabilities are growing so fast and everything, and there are like some models as Mythos that has been deployed that are very bad for cybersecurity, even like banks are worrying about it and everything. Like, how does like deploying a tool that is very powerful for any people to have it, like even like a terrorist or someone like is having like a nuclear weapon in your hands? Why should we give access to the general public? And why, for example, like the fact that they chose 150 organizations, I don't know, to share it with, how do we choose the people or this organization, or like what's the...
It's a difficult one because it comes down to the integrity of the organization with whom you're working. So there are certain nefarious vendors, I would say is the polite way of putting it, where they don't have that mindset. They don't care what you use it for, right? And those tend to be the ones where the highest level of external risk comes in from a supply chain perspective. But then the other thing that's interesting about protecting against that from an AI and agentic perspective, some of the really big defense organizations I work with and some of the really small rapid banks that I work with, like the kind of the fintech startups, they have the same question. And what we are starting to see is to take away the risk in the AI, whether it's generative or agentic within the organization, you need to start considering what is the bias that you're embedding in those tools that you're building. Because to your point, sometimes you can accidentally expose your entire environment if you're not paying attention. And quite frequently, the most common version I see of that is around large language model bias from public investment areas or public areas, where you do have terrorists and other people embedding nefarious code that people are then copying into their businesses. I saw a couple of really good examples of that recently where generative AI was used as a co-pilot to build an application, and they took the source code from somewhere else. That source code had been embedded with a cyber attack arc. So as soon as that application went live on the internal compute, they had access to everything. So there's a solution to it, which we're working on at the moment from a Hashi perspective, where one of our tooling sets is Terraform. And we can take a large language model and help you turn it into a small language model, which is you've removed all the bias, it's been checked, you know it's safe, and you can allow developers and DevSecOps to work on that. And the way that you do that is there's a new concept which is coming through, and I've been writing a couple of white papers on this for the last couple of months, where you have a concise language model. And what happens is you spin up the concise language model temporarily within a set of policies and guardrails you've already created. The concise language model then goes to the public large language model, takes whatever it needs, verifies it, secures it with those dynamic secrets, and then builds a small language model in real time. And then because of the way our automation technology works, the CLM's gone, which means you're not paying for permanent compute power, and as a result, it's very, very cost effective. If you then multiply that down by remembering the cloud is not a place, those small language models can run really, really effectively on things like Z mainframe with Linux 1 or whatever it may be. But the net doesn't really matter what the infrastructure is. But if you want to do it that way, you can eliminate some of that risk that you just described by taking a large language model, using a concise language model to validate, and then generate a small language model and have that as the self-service environment for a developer. And suddenly you start eliminating some of those Trojan holes, which is what you're describing. Does that make sense? Cool.
Excellent. Well, we'll run out of time there. So I'd just like to say thank you to the guys on the stage here. And I'm sure you'll be hanging around for questions afterwards. But thanks very much, guys.
Thank you. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Oh, shot. Not working now. Brilliant. Thank you all very much. This feels a bit overwhelming
I'm going to show you one more of my comics. So it'll be overwhelming showing you the comic after after the fantastic panel. A great topics and conversations today with RedSafe, Red Hat, and everyone else. This comes along as I want to make a comparative between the Ludites. Who knows who the Ludites were? Yeah. So Ludites were English textile workers who between 1811 and 1816 protested against industrialization by destroying machinery that they believe threatened their jobs and livelihoods. So I think that's a very good comparative between back in the day with the Industrial Revolution and what's happening today with artificial intelligence and the future with, or I should say, the present with quantum. So we just don't want to resist change. So I think really here, and that's the reason of my comic, creativity and human beings are here to drive the force and to drive the, and that's the fuel of the prompting and AI and quantum. So this is also this is just going to be my pitch to when I go to companies and I told about what we do. So we could then see AI as an enhancement of mental workforce. We analyze large volumes of information more efficiently, automate processes. So it's just not a tool, it's a new layer of productivity, a new way to compete, a new way to progress. And just when we think we've reached the top, the next frontier is already on site. It's quantum. Knowing all this, who could be willing to see the revolution as an outsider? The future won't wait. It will reward those who lead the revolution. So for years, we really asked whether machines will become more intelligent. Maybe the more important question is, what will humans do with that intelligence? Because AI can amplify ideas. Quantum can expand possibilities, but creativity is what gives them direction. The future will belong to those with the most powerful technology, IBM. But it will also belong to those with the most powerful imagination, and that has to be us. So don't be threatened, guys. There's no terminators here. No one's going to be seeing our jobs. So that's the message. We're just going to be a lot more productive, and that's the message we need to be sending. So on that note, and just before, so I'd just like to wrap up. I'd like to do the thank yous. So I'd like to thank, first of all, to my client and now friend, Frank Williams, for helping me organize this event. Thank you, Frank. I'd like to thank you, the audience, for being here today. You've been brilliant and making it to the end. So I really hope you enjoyed it. Also, all the speakers, amazing speakers. I never thought I could, we could put this together, this event today with those great speakers. So thank you all. To you, Richard, for conducting brilliantly this event. I really appreciate that. Also, I would like to thank the IBMS Chema, who is a great support and is really helping us with, with just doing our work here in the UK. So to the rest of IBMS and Arrow for helping us with the room and everything else. A brilliant day with this innovation center. And last, to you, Tyler, for helping us with the IB. And on that note, we're just going to be doing a little bit more of coffee and cake, so a little bit more of networking. And also we got a room booked at the Over One for those ones who would like to join us. Drinks after 3, 4 o'clock. I know it might be a little bit early, but we are in Britain after all. So I go to the airport and I see people drinking at 6 o'clock in the morning. So, so yeah, please join us here, let's continue with the conversations and with the topics, and then please join us over one, and we can have a drink and chill on this great event. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.